man, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I actually miss the days when everyone was overhyping The Mandalorian and saying, oh my god, this is the thing that saved Star Wars, it's the greatest thing ever, when really, in my opinion, it was just okay. It was never my thing, it was always underwhelming, underwritten, but at least that first season kind of knew what it was, kind of knew what it was doing, and it worked. It succeeded at that for the most part. Now, it's just pretty depressing. I mean, we're at a point where I feel like most people have kind of gotten over the show, which is a bummer. Like, what Star Wars fan wants to dislike a piece of official media to begin with? But it's a much worse feeling to come out of it feeling this down on it, only to find out that, a lot of people kind of share the same sentiment. For once, I'm not the weirdo who's saying, oh my god, The Mandalorian is bad. This season was just the latest in a line of Disney Plus Star Wars shows that, with the exception of our Lord and Savior Andor, have all been really bad. Like Obi-Wan, the Book of Boba Fett, the past 2 seasons of The Mandalorian. I know I'm in the minority on that, but this season really has brought forth a lot of the issues, and I think Andor honestly spoiled us with how great the writing was. So yeah, great, thanks for tuning in. Mando Season 3 sucks, and if you hadn't had the misfortune of sinking 8 hours, you'll never get back into it. I beg you to save yourselves. The end. No, of course, come on, I'm not like that. I have more to say than that. This is a case where I need to outline the problems with this season for my own sanity. So, welcome to a FIlmSpeak First, a video I've made entirely for myself, my own personal therapy session, my journey to interrogate the Mickey Mouse-sized problem that is The Mandalorian, and ultimately pose a single core question to Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau. What the fuck is this Sarlacc shit, man?
This is the way.
This is the way.
That's right, this is the way to Raid Shadow Legends. You've heard the name, but do you actually know what you're missing out on by not playing this game? Well, a lot, I'm gonna say that much. And I mean, don't even get me started on the characters. Just like The Mandalorian, Raid is loaded with cool characters. Here's my top 3, for instance. We've got Gorgorob, who's a great all-rounder and can be played at level 50 with good speed and defensive stats. Then there's Husk, who's one of the more underrated epics in the game. He's a really hard-hitting champion for boss fights, as well as a good control champion. And then my personal favorite, one of the lizard men, Krisk the Ageless. Krisk has one of the highest base defense stats in the game, which makes it very easy to build him to be a team tank. And the best part is you can get him early and he's great all the way through to the end of the game. And right now, Raid is going on an egg hunt, but it's not your normal supermarket brand eggs we're looking at here. No, it's dragon eggs. Just download Raid Shadow Legends using the links below, copy your in-game player ID, and then head on over to egghunt.plarium.com from April 14th to May 15th. Enter your player ID and then journey through the flaming portal to embark on an exciting AR adventure. Once you're there, scour the Dragon's Lair using your phone to find all the secrets you can. By doing that, you'll be entered to win amazing in-game items and even real-life prizes, ranging from legendary Raid Champion to Amazon gift cards with a total value of $20,000. This event is for new players, but that doesn't mean the people who already played the game can't get in on this excellent adventure. See what I did there? With all of this exciting stuff and more coming to Raid, if you haven't started playing, seriously, what are you waiting for? The game is free. Use my link in the description or scan my QR code to get insane bonuses. We're talking an epic champion Talia from the Sacred Order faction and other useful things like energy refills, skill tome, XP boosters, you name it. So just hit my link in the description and I will see you on the battlefield. And thank you so much to Raid for sponsoring this video. The showrunners have lost sight of what this show is even about. Season 1, it was like this Adventure of the Week throwback, very episodic with Mando and Grogu with an underlying serialized story. Simple. Season 2 threw in some complications and tried to deepen the show unnecessarily, shifting its focus with a bunch of world building rather than focusing on what people were tuning in for, which was just, the adventures of Mando and Grogu. It was still functional though, even if I didn't care for the nostalgia and fan service and really bad deep fake Luke Skywalker's just, oh my god, unforgivable. Then we get to the Book of Boba Fett, which was the telltale sign we were headed for a disaster. That show completely threw the whole thing off by roping people in with Boba Fett, only for the show to exist as an extension of The Mandalorian. Hell, it feels like half wrong to even call this season 3 of The Mandalorian, because it feels like we already got that. And considering the fact that you needed to have watched The Book of Boba Fett in order to understand The Mandalorian season 3, I mean, maybe they should have called it The Mandalorian, The Book of Boba Fett, or turned it into a TV movie. It's just, I know a lot of people who didn't watch that show because they didn't really care about Boba Fett. They didn't think that they were going to be completely lost by tuning into The Mandalorian season 3, something they had already invested 2 seasons worth of their time into. That was the biggest mistake, and it's all downhill from there. Either way, here, it's like they have every cool idea they've ever thought of for Star Wars, but they want to use every single one, and nothing can be left on the cutting room floor because, you know, Dave Filoni has the keys to the car and he can do whatever the hell he wants. Any particular thing in the show is forced to wrap up way too quickly, and so much is happening that Mando's become a side character in his own show. You would think the direction would be Din's quest to restoring Mandalore and earning his place back, but I mean, that was over and done with in what, like 1.5 episodes, maybe 2? And like a lot of people, at the end of episode 2, I was left scratching my head like, I thought this was gonna be the whole season, or at least half the season, along with the Bo-Katan stuff, but you know, I guess it's not. And look, the Bo-Katan stuff here is interesting. I actually really liked a lot of it, but it's also weirdly disconnected from what the show supposedly is, aside from the fact that it's a C or D story at best, when they could have at least made it the focus so we'd have something to follow along with week to week. Ever since they decided to double down on a linear narrative story, The Mandalorian has basically derailed itself. It's not like doing that is a bad thing, but it still wants to have the aimless charm of a Mission of the Week series while building towards something else and building up characters, subplots, trying to intersect them and make a chess game out of it like, well, much better shows have done. It has 2 contradictory ambitions, and neither comes to fruition as a result of being disastrously non-committal to either one. It's a show, if you can even call it that has all of these ideas and threads that are presented and then resolved in a matter of 30 minutes or so. It's not interested in exploring these ideas or the ramifications of the larger Star Wars universe. And if it doesn't want to do that, then go back to the Mission of the Week adventures that endeared people to your show rather than some big overarching thing that's supposed to be consequential. Season 1 of Mando, where it was more episodic, might not have been my thing, but I at least understood it. It's become this drab slog of a meandering mess that's only interested in epic saga form, which is fine, but like the fact that it wasn't that, as opposed to, oh, every single other thing in Star Wars is what endeared people to the show in the first place. And then they have these random kiddie episodes like episode 6 that make no sense and do nothing. And can I just say, I don't expect every show on television to have HBO level writing or prestige drama or not be tailored towards kids, nor do I think that level of sophistication tends to lend itself favorably to genre entertainment anyway. But this show is an embarrassment to watch when things like Succession or Barry, shit man, even Andor are airing in its orbit. It has the most functional utilitarian dialogue ever. No one ever actually has a conversation. It's like a bunch of NPCs giving mission orders or radiant dialogue in a video game. The whole show has just become an excuse to experiment with the volume, and it's not like the experiments are that impressive to look at. And I really wish that technology was being lent to better things rather than Disney just bogarting it for their mediocre ass storytelling. Let me get this out of the way before I say some not nice things. I have a lot of respect for Dave Filoni and what he was able to do to make the prequels a much better series of films. The Clone Wars is brilliant. It's arguably the best anything Star Wars has ever made, and Rebels is equally as good. I do think he has talent, I just don't necessarily think he should be a creative lead on this show, or really just in general. He can be a lore and story guy, because that's what we've seen him excel at. That's where his encyclopedic knowledge comes in handy. But his obsession with his pet characters like Ahsoka or Bo-Katan and the Clone Wars, and then trying to retroactively make this tie into that, is so dumb and makes for an even more jumbled identity crisis. And I think a lot of this trickles down to the issues I have with episode 6. It feels like another Filoni Clone Wars haphazard tangent, and one of the worst episodes of Clone Wars at that. What does an episode with separatists and Din's prejudice towards droids really have to do with anything here? Is the season supposed to be about this prejudice? They do sure keep bringing it up without really addressing it, just kinda comes in random waves. He hates droids, but is compelled to rebuild this particular one to be the marshal of the town instead of him? That kinda goes against all the trust issues he's had this entire season, and there's never a moment where he has to come to terms with that. No one evolves as a person outside of Bo-Katan, and that's being generous. Outside of her stepping into a leadership role, there isn't really much there either. And if they're gonna go that way, maybe they should change the name of the show to The Mandalorians, or Some Mandalorians. Is this season about Bo-Katan reclaiming the darksaber and uniting Mandalore? Because it definitely feels that way, but it also feels like they don't want to commit because they're afraid to make Bo-Katan the lead of The Mandalorian. At the same time though, we're all conditioned to tune into the show for Din Djarin, so if you're gonna have Bo take on a more central lead, maybe make her a co-protagonist with Din. Give Din something to do that ties into Bo's journey. I mean, that's kind of what they tease in the first couple of episodes, but you know, then Din bathes in the waters and his arc's kind of over and done with, which is why it feels like Bo overtakes the show and Din is then put on the back burner. He serves no purpose through a lot of this series. But let's circle back to episode 6. This episode, what an absolute train wreck. What does any of the opening of this episode have to do with any of the events that follow in it? They have an interesting conversation about trade stuff and politics, but then they reduce it to this weird Romeo and Juliet thing, and it's just like, what? This is not what Star Wars sounds like. It's always been about the big picture stuff. It's why kids are able to easily consume it and understand the more mature topics being explored here. That's what George Lucas means when he says that Star Wars is for children. I mean, outside of the trappings and all of that. But government hiring bounty hunters to hunt down people, the rise of fascism, the war machine, these are all big picture issues that are made palatable for a broader audience. I get it's for kids on the surface, but this just loses its grasp on universality. The showrunners wind up turning all of these interesting ideas, this opening, and then the rest of the episode into an SNL skit. But let's talk about Moth Gideon, since everyone was so excited to see this guy come back. I guess Project Necromancer is repurposed to create Snoke or revive Palpatine to lead into the sequels. And that makes sense. I kind of like the fact that they're teasing ideas that retroactively make the sequels better, make one of the dumbest decisions in the entirety of Star Wars at least somewhat palatable. But in the context of Season 3 of The Mandalorian, the whole idea is just Gideon trying to clone himself in such a lame way. I mean, look, we're never told that's actually happening. That's just kind of something we have to assume for ourselves, and I hope it's the case, because if not, the whole idea of Gideon just trying to clone himself is such a lame way to resolve the cloning plot. I guess the one way this actually creates synergy with the rest of the story is that it's essentially the antithesis to the Mandalorians in the way they operate. They operate on trust and unity, working together, and we see that they're stronger when when they come together. They never really run into much conflict when having to learn to come together. The hurdle should be in the fact that all these different factions of Mandalorians are so diametrically opposed to one another, are tokens of different forms of extremism, and they have to work past who they were for the preservation of their kind, their culture, and their planet. I just don't see much of an obstacle because they just sort of fall into line all at once. That's why it would have been more interesting to have someone like the Armorer or Bo's rival, whatever the fuck his name is, work with Gideon. It would have shown them putting their beliefs ahead of their people, which is sort of what the Armorer has been doing for a while, especially in the way she exiled Din in the Book of Boba Fett. Mandalorians have an issue where they're in a constant civil war because of a lack of clear leadership. I guess Bo-Katan will change that, but then you still have the Armorer doing her thing, throwing her power around. And so even when Bo is in charge, it's like, well, is she really in charge? What's the point of the Armorer? Because the Armorer seems to be the person calling all the shots here. Compare this to Moth Gideon. He and his need to act as a unit, as one with no one but himself in charge, is actually a nice contrast to that. I just wish it was actually introduced before the finale so we could have had a chance to explore that juxtaposition.
Yes, 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 yes.
And speaking of Grogu, I'm just gonna say it. I know a lot of you are probably gonna hate me for this, but Grogu has lost his charm now. It's not enough anymore for him to just be a prop on set, a puppet, or fittingly, for the characters to tell us how he's feeling rather than them finding a way for Grogu to express his feelings. Like, if he's going to be a character in the show, make him a character. The most insulting thing about the finale is that it feels like the show got abruptly canceled and they were forced to do a hack job to rush through every plot point the show had ever set up. Like the season overall, it's a sad, messy shadow of a once serviceably fun show, albeit not one I was super into, but one where I got the appeal in the simplicity of it all. This finale is like Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau took the story and made a Jackson Pollock painting with it. Was Grogu not already Din's adopted son? What was the point in having him follow the way only to break apart and be a contractor for the New Republic? And now he's living apart from Mandalore, the place that he just fought to preserve? Wouldn't it have made more sense to just have Din break away from the fanatics for Grogu, to disagree with their order and the way that they choose to run things because of his love for this being, for his pseudo-son? Like, show his dedication to his son and come to terms with the fact that he doesn't want to follow the extremism of that cult anymore. The unification of Mandalore seemed to be the interest this season, and I'm down with that. I think it's a great thing to explore. But then you forgot it was a show about Din Djarin. Oh, and Gideon's back, so we have to do something with that and tie it into both plots and resolve his return in the same episode, right? No, you didn't need to cram everything into the finale. But I guess, Filoni or Favreau are riding high with the brilliant Gideon clones idea, which in and of itself I don't hate, but I sure hate the way they become a cop-out so they can kill Gideon, but not kill Gideon. There was genuinely something interesting there with teeing up the First Order and how they would eventually rise to power, trying to conquer Mandalore and appropriate their heritage and resources for a new military. I especially like how Gideon refers to these artifacts, relics, and pieces of their culture as trinkets, in such a demeaning and telling way of looking at another culture's heritage. Too bad there's really only that line and then nothing else. They don't even do anything with the cloning subplot. It just blows up in his face and then it's over. And then that spectacular bottle episode, episode 3, which honestly feels like it belongs in a show like Andor rather than The Mandalorian. Something that explored the inherent weaknesses of a democratic system like the New Republic, and how these former Imperials don't really care about the previous faction they were a part of. They just want a means to continue their work and are thwarted as a result of it. It's able to get to the heart in a pretty subtle way of how these fascist regimes are able to rise to power in the turbulence of a governing transition. Din's capture from the penultimate episode means nothing because he just escapes. There's no real confrontation with Gideon. Din and Grogu once again make it out alive because the show is stakesless. And then because the show has stretched itself thin in every direction, Bo's unification of Mandalore just kinda succeeds suddenly in the background, even though it's been the main story point this whole season. When it finally comes down to it all the Mandalorians just show up and it's over. There's never any real sense of what's going on with that final battle outside of some faux cross-cutting to make it seem like something's going on concurrent to Din and Gideon, but they seem to entirely misunderstand the point of cross-cutting and why it works. They're just showing two separate things with nothing connecting them. It's like a soap opera more than it is a space opera.
It's yours now.
What is?
The darksaber.
So after all the drama surrounding the darksaber in The Mandalorian, Moth Gideon just casually destroys it. The show's been building up to the importance of the darksaber to the Mandalorians for 3 series, including Clone Wars and Rebels, only to have it tossed aside. It's like the writers just got bored, couldn't figure it out, and decided to move on to the next big thing without giving it the proper attention and resolution it deserved. You can really feel the lack of care behind this part of the story, and maybe that's because Filoni was too preoccupied with Ahsoka and Heir to the Empire, and Favreau was, God knows where Favreau was, lost is what he was. We were all excited to see Bo-Katan finally rise to the throne and witness the Mandalorians return to Mandalore as was promised and focused on. What a pitiful, missed opportunity. Throughout most of the season, the Armorer treated Grogu as if he was Din's son, but suddenly when he tries to make him his apprentice, she says, oh, he's too young, he needs his parents' permission. That doesn't make any sense though, considering there are plenty of other Mandalorians, Din included, who were brought into the fold as orphaned foundlings. And so the workaround is simply to have Din adopting Grogu, which is pretty much what the whole foundling thing was about in the first place, to which the Armorer is like, yeah, you know, that works, sure, why not? This whole era of Star Wars can really be boiled down to lack of a plan and pandering to the lowest common denominator, and then retroactively trying to fill in the blanks, retcon or fix what's already been done. This is the worst way to write for a franchise. It's baffling that Favreau is asking fans to look online for shit. Like, no dude, if I need to dive into supplemental material in order for the thing you made to make sense and you're actively insisting that's what I need to do, then your thing sucks. Full stop. I'm a fan, but I shouldn't need to dedicate more time to the thing you made than the time it took to watch it. It's lazy and desperate to expect other works to do the heavy lifting you couldn't care to even attempt. You want Star Wars to be everything we consume, but you're making it all sugar. If you want to dominate my media diet, you can't be skimping on the main meals. I mean, why the hell would having such an unpleasant experience with the show make me want to read the books anyway? This makes me want to say fuck that. I'm done. I'm not diving any deeper ever. Filoni and Favreau know where they want the universe to go, especially Filoni, but they don't want to waste time telling the stories they need to get there. They just want to get there. They want to do this Empire First Order remnant thing, dropping little hints, gambling that something else down the line will flesh it out properly. They just want to do a Wikipedia catalog, which is so Dave Filoni. He writes an outline and adds dialogue to it. I don't like that you're shortchanging me. If you aren't interested in telling a story, give your show to someone else. Don't monopolize the entire franchise and not tell the stories you're pretending you want to tell. I'm not saying everything has to be planned out to a T, but for fuck's sake, man, have some sort of direction. You can't rush your way to Heir to the Empire. Do the groundwork or don't do any of this. Actually, let me rephrase that. I don't want Heir to the Empire if Dave Filoni or Jon Favreau's names are attached to it. Leave it the hell alone. I don't expect them to, but God, I beg them to, or at least just have a serious come to Jesus moment, reevaluate your entire direction and process for making these shows. Look at Tony Gilroy in Andor and then reflect on what you're doing, because man, after 3 seasons and a spinoff, it ain't working. God, Ahsoka, please turn me around on this whole thing. Please, you're our only hope.